Welcome to another video, Purple Political Talk here. Today is Sunday, September 26, 2021, and today we're going to be discussing the 2024 presidential election and do an update on one of the scenarios that, over time I would say was a pretty likely scenario, but, things have shifted. This is a scenario between Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and President Joe Biden for the 2024 presidential election. So this is a very interesting prediction because I think this would be a pretty tight race. But we're gonna go through it, as we get through the prediction. But before we do begin, I want to remind you guys to like, subscribe, and to turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. And also that Purple Political Talk channel members are now open. If you would like to become a Purple Political Talk channel member, you could do so by pressing the link down in the description or the join tab next to the subscribe button. And in that spirit, I did want to give a very big thank you to our Purple Political Talk channel members, David Maxwell and Adam Hurst. We really couldn't do this without you. And I know this has been the first upload in like about a week, so I'm really sorry. A lot of things have been going on, but this week I am, sticking with daily uploads. So if you guys go over to the community tab, you guys are going to be able to see what the schedule is looking like. With all of this housekeeping out of the way, let's get started with the predictions. So, I think that this race is actually very interesting in the sense that for the Democrats, Ron DeSantis has become someone that they could somewhat easily attack. And I think that, I think Ron DeSantis has put himself in a place of political vulnerability in the sense that he's going to have kind of the same type of effect that Trump had. The Republicans are the Democrats are going to try to hammer him with anything they possibly can. Now, I think what could be different is his demeanor, for example, how he reacts to these certain things and what could end up happening. And I think this might be a difference, between a victory and a loss for Ron DeSantis. And I think that honestly, at this point in time, a DeSantis campaign could be very interesting for Joe Biden. And even if Joe Biden runs, because that's something we do not know for sure. I mean, it's something that's been heavily speculated. I mean, it's not, 100% said or done that it's going to happen. If Biden does end up running, I think the race changes in its entirety. And I think we're going to be looking at a very interesting race. And honestly, with this election, I think we really have to take into account what are the real issues going to be, because a lot of those things come into mind. If people are worried about other things, if they're worried more about social issues than the economy, then the panorama of the race will definitely change. And I think with this election, with 2024, we're still far ahead. We're still a good 3 years away from the election. But I think it's pretty easy to say that COVID and the long-lasting effects of COVID, we don't know how COVID is going to be by then. If it is as bad as it is today, you can forget about the Democrats winning another administration. But I think, honestly, what's really going to be more important, I think, other than the actual disease aspect of it, the long-term economic impact, social impacts, and things like that are going to be real issues. And I will get to, in each of these states, discuss, where would each of these policies kind of generally benefit these candidates. And honestly, with how things are going right now, with current trends we have and things like that, where are some of these states standing and where we could expect them actually to go for this election. So as you can see right now, I'm filling in all of the safe states. I'm almost done. And, I think that these safe states hold characteristics that some of the states simply don't. In this point of political instability, that, I think that these states, regardless of what ends up happening, unless something extremely horrible happens, the safe blue states and the safe red states will stay the same. And I think, honestly, it's going to be something very interesting to see. Because, I think there's a possibility maybe some of these states shift. And I think it's not completely out of the question. But as of right now, I think these states have some sort of political stability to the point where it's going to be able to stay where it is. So this covers all the safe states. So let's talk about the real states, the close states. Let's talk about our likely, lean, and tilt states. So let's start off with likely states. Likely states are states that would go to either party by under 15%, but more than 5.5% or 5%. So there's actually a very big amount of, a big range, I guess, of states and their margins. So let's start off with the Democrats like I usually do. So I think that for this election, there's going to be certain states are going to take into the likely column. Minnesota, for example, I think is somewhere where the Democrats can end up winning. Social issues are very important in this state. And, a lot of the issues that were really important, like the economic issues and things like that, I think we kind of like gotten lost in the state and they worry about other things. So I think Minnesota could go likely for Joe Biden. I think in other places like Virginia, I mean, we're seeing a close race for governor here. And I think it's extraordinary circumstances. I do think that if things do not go well for Joe Biden, the Republicans could certainly make some inroads here with certain groups of voters to the point where they're bringing down margins and it's really not, that far into the Democratic column. And, I think that this governor race we're seeing is really going to have an impact on that. And moving on to some other places around the country, I think Colorado, in a race against Joe Biden, I think Joe Biden against Ron DeSantis, I think it's going to stick with Joe Biden. I think that one of the big things we're going to see is, I think generally speaking, the suburbs are going to stay the same or turn a little bit more red. I think that DeSantis compared to Trump is much more of a suburban candidate. And of course, DeSantis is going to have to, this is all contingent on one thing, I think that DeSantis, he has to keep kind of his popularity, his record and things like that, sort of where it is now. If DeSantis's nationwide record, worsens via, unfair media coverage, via actually doing something bad, via all these different things, and you start seeing, kind of the picture at a nationwide level that, completely proven that people despise DeSantis, like, for example, some of the Florida Democrats do with COVID and things like that, you could see impacts in the suburbs. But I do think, generally speaking, in all of these states, you're going to see, a moderately successful, Democratic Party because of those social issues that are important, because of the establishment popularity in these states. So that brings me now to my Republican likely states. So these are, again, states that would go by less than 15%, but more than 5%. So I think that, the Republicans certainly do have a good amount of likely states. I think that states like Iowa, states like Ohio, these are states that are going to be in the likely column, if not the safe column in the future, just because the Democrats have lost so much rural support. And, I think that a lot of the loss of rural support was kind of the Democrats saying, it doesn't really matter. We could focus our resources somewhere else and gain more benefit. And yes, to a certain extent, and I think they're right. I mean, if you give up the rural areas, you're gaining somewhere else. But I think to a big stance, it lost them states like Iowa and Ohio, and I think those seats are long gone for the Democratic Party unless they run some candidate that's right from this area, from this Midwest area, not so much from the East Coast and things like that. That's very popular in the region. They're not going to end up winning here, and I think that, of course, this scenario is certainly not an example of that because, DeSantis is not a Democrat and Biden is from Delaware. I mean, he's from close by, but he's still from the East Coast. So I think that, the days are long gone where Democrats are winning in these areas. It's because they give them away in turn for the suburban areas, which, again, I don't blame them because that's a great political strategy. Look at all the places you're winning that you wouldn't have been winning. But another extent, you also gave up the South, which is another discussion. But, I think Iowa and Ohio are going to be solidly for DeSantis. I think Biden has lost, a lot of ground here. And I think that one of the things that we're going to see become more important is community excitement. This has always been a factor. But I think with social media and things like that, excitement is an important thing because people are going to see that, wow, this person's campaign is really popular. And, I think the place that it really matters most is in rural areas, in smaller towns that, I think that the Republicans could make inroads using those manners. And I think in the past couple of years, it's been an example of how they have. Now, I mean, in suburban areas is going to be really where you're going to see the really big battle. And it's going to be a battle of how bad do the Republicans get blown out. I mean, in certain areas, they're not going to get blown out at all. But in other areas, it could get pretty ugly. And I think there's other states other than Iowa and Ohio that actually fall under the likely Republican column. I think that we're looking at places like Texas. I think that Texas is a state that, there has been certain shifts in populations that could move it further to the left. With all of this being said, I kind of see this hard, to believe. Here's why. I really think that it's going to be hard because Texans, if in their majority, even people who vote Democratic, they have certain beliefs, certain things, and I think that among them are guns and things like that. And getting into kind of fiscal stuff, we're talking about taxes and things like that. You know, with a lot of these things, with I think that the Democrats were on a great path with Beto O'Rourke, but after Beto O'Rourke really, pulled the plug earlier than he should have, I think a lot of the progress he made in Texas went all the way back because it scared a lot of people. And I think honestly, that might be enough to keep it in the likely column for the Republicans. And I think that yes, while the growth of areas like Austin and Houston and San Antonio over the pandemic years as people is moving to the Sun Belt, while that's important, one, I don't think it's really to the masses enough to win, or flip the state. Or I mean, maybe it's enough to make it closer, but also, let's think about this rationally. A lot of these people have been moving to Texas. In big part, it's been because of tax reasons and things like that. And those fiscal things would likely mean that, they're moving because for more conservative values. But that's besides the point. So that covers our likely states. You can notice notable omissions, the state of Florida. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So that covers our likely states. Let's move on to our lean states. So for your lean states, I do think that Maine's 2nd district and Nebraska's 2nd district are going to be 2 lean states. So I think that Maine's 2nd district could actually end up voting a little bit more for DeSantis. Now, I think that the interesting caveat here is how popular is DeSantis going to be in the Northeast? And I think that's going to be a hard question. I think that Trump had some sort of different... Trump is Trump, and I think the Trump excitement levels are going to be really hard to replicate. Even like someone like DeSantis, who is a really popular figure who can really move people. Now, with all this being said, I still do think he's going to win here. I don't think it's going to be by Trump margins, at least in the Northeast. Now, in Nebraska's 2nd district, I just think it just comes down that district has been turning more and more blue over the years, and I think this year's they're going to be out of the norm, out of the path it's been over the last couple of elections. So I think it's definitely going to end up going to Joe Biden. So now let's talk about the real Republican or Democratic lean states. So places like New Mexico, places like Nevada, these are places that I do see, the Democrats losing some ground in. It's more in New Mexico and New Hampshire. That's another state. I think that New Mexico and New Hampshire are 2 states that could be trending a little bit to the left. New Mexico, I think it's a lot of because of, the Hispanic population that is trending a little bit more to the right than they have been in the last couple of years. And, the Democrats, their stance right now in New Mexico is we kind of have it as a safe area, and they're really not investing that much money into it. And that could prove to be a problem. I mean, take a look at the Senate race in New Mexico. It got really close because the Democrats got way too comfortable. Do I blame them? No, I mean, it is a state that has been trending more blue. Now, that getting comfortable could prove disaster for the Biden administration, making this race a lot closer than it needs to be. In Nevada, I just do think that it's going to stay kind of where it is right now. I think that this is going to be the epitome of a swing state. I mean, I think a lot of people thought Nevada was long gone for the Democrats. They're going to win it forever. And I think that we're far away from that. I think Nevada is a state that could get pretty close over the next couple of election cycles. And is the next couple of election cycles that are going to decide, how Nevada ends up voting. And in New Hampshire, I do think that, I think that since DeSantis has somewhat more of that, college-educated voter appeal better than Trump, he's going to be able to, make inroads in the state, probably get it under 5%. I don't think it's necessarily going to be, razor thin margins. I do think, however, it's going to be a little bit closer. So that covers our Democratic states. Let's talk about the Republican states. So as of right now, I think the states I could say that, Ron DeSantis is winning by a lead margin for sure, or Florida. I think Florida is somewhere that I think has shifted a lot. I think that DeSantis' popularity has clearly fallen a little bit since I last did one of these predictions. And I think that, COVID and things like that have hit him. Now, I think in the long term, it won't affect it that much. And honestly, where he's building support is really going to help him out. It's growing areas, and you have, if the Latino support completely turns on its feet for the Republican Party, again, disaster for Joe Biden. And I mean, DeSantis isn't as popular as he was in Florida, but Joe Biden is nowhere near popular in Florida. So, And excitement levels and things like that show that, DeSantis likely will win this race by a comfortable 3 to 4% margin, which again, in Florida standards, pretty comfortable margin. So I think that's kind of the case with Florida. It's very interesting. I'm probably going to be making a video probably next week about, the Florida gubernatorial race, because I think this race is very interesting with the primaries, with general election and all of that. So I'm going to be updating you guys on that. Not this upcoming week, but next week. So I think that's one of the places where I think Ron DeSantis could do better than Biden in. And I think that one of the places where Ron DeSantis could actually win by a lead margin, and I think is a pretty interesting call. I think Georgia. I think that certainly the in Georgia, the Democrats have built such a big base with African American voters and such, and while this may be the case, I think we cannot understate the fact that the Democrats only won by less than 10 to 12,000 votes in the state of Georgia in 2020. So that's a pretty small margin. And I think with a lot of those country club Republicans that voted for Biden because they didn't want Trump, I think they might end up going back and voting for DeSantis, making it go red. And I really don't think that Georgia is safe and solidly blue for now. I think there's a possibility if things, go in the Democratic favor, they're going to end up having this state for a long time. But I think as of right now, where things stand, the general, economic sense of the country, where a lot of people are focused on the economy, on COVID issues, I think a lot of country club Republicans could end up voting for Ron DeSantis. So I think it kind of covers all our lean states. I think everything else on this map that you're seeing will go by less than, a lean margin, so a tilt margin, so less than 1.5%. So with this, I usually go from west to east, starting with Arizona. So, Arizona's a state I've been thinking about, but I do think ultimately DeSantis is probably going to end up winning. Again, I think that we cannot understand the fact. I mean, DeSantis has been losing popularity in Florida, but so has Biden. And Biden's popularity loss comes from a broad range of reasons. We're seeing, the big thing down in the border, and I think that's going to influence. Even though it may not be in Arizona, a lot of the border action, even if it's in Texas for its entirety, or majority rather, it's going to be very important. It's going to be a deciding factor for a lot of voters in Maricopa County and other places. So I do think that Ron DeSantis, again, with his suburban appeal, elevated suburban appeal, I think he can make inroads in that state. Same thing in North Carolina. I think North Carolina could get interesting because of African American vote, but I do think that ultimately it just really comes down to the fact that, the Republicans have such a big base here. And with that being said, I think that there's things that could shift here, and I think for the Democrats to win in North Carolina, Biden's gonna have to be very popular. And as of right now, it's probably not gonna be the case. And it's happened before, but it's not likely that his approval ratings is going to really drastically increase. So that covers those two states. Let's go on to the Rust Belt, I guess the most important region, and what's really going to be deciding this election. And for the next couple of election cycles, the Rust Belt is going to be a decisive factor. So with this, I do think that Wisconsin and Pennsylvania do end up going to Ron DeSantis. I think that Joe Biden is going to lose these states. I think that the economic situation in the country is going to push a lot of voters over the edge. And with Ron DeSantis on the ticket, I think he really has the populist message that is really popular. So I think that's the case. And in Michigan, I think that the Democrats have just a big base right now. And, I don't think they've lost that much support. And I think that unlike Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, the Democrats have, I would say, a semi-solid grasp on Michigan. So I think they're going to narrowly hold on. So this covers our election map. Ron DeSantis at 291 electoral votes and Joe Biden at 247. So I think the big, decisive factor in this race is how popular is DeSantis and how popular is Biden. And ultimately, with what I can project and things like that, with the incumbency factor for Biden, which I think the incumbency factor from now moving forward is going to really hurt you over helping you, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, just because of how the incumbency factor is now treated with social media and things like that. But yeah, so that covers our prediction. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If so, please give it a huge thumbs up, like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. And remember to check out all our content this week. We have a full daily upload schedule this week, which you guys will find later today in the community tab. So again, thank you guys so much for watching, and goodbye.